Good afternoon. Today is Friday, April the 17th of 2020, and this is Did You See That? And today we're going to be discussing an element out of 1 Samuel chapters 25 through 27, which is our reading for today. And today I'm going to address what is to many the 300-pound gorilla in the room, and that would be at the end of chapter 25 of 1 Samuel, the marriage of David to Abigail. And of course, from there, we see that we already knew he had married Michal, which was Saul's daughter, which subsequent to this, Saul had already given her to another man, Paltiel. And she would later come back to David when he was king over Israel. But we also see that before taking Abigail to wife, he had taken Ahinoam to wife as well. And so this brings up the question about polygamy and polygamy in regards to God's plan. And when you read the commentaries on this particular portion of Scripture, you're going to see the gamut. And many of them will give excuse to it, and others will not. And so I'm going to give you the scriptural foundation for my comments, and we have to have the Spirit convict us of the right understanding of this. For we understand that marriage to a wife is one man and one woman. This is established from the very beginning back in Genesis chapter 2. At the end of that chapter, after woman was made and given to man, and man was expressing his gratitude, but also there was a declaration made there, and it says, "For this reason shall a man leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." But here it's no ambiguity. It's the one flesh, and this is even alluded to in the New Testament when Paul talks about our chastity of moral purity in sexual relations with our wife, and that we don't even have relations with others, but adultery is definitely outlawed from the very beginning, and especially when we come to the Decalogue in Exodus chapter 20, where we see it unequivocally outlawed. But even Paul reiterates back in the New Testament that we don't have illicit sexual affairs because we are joining ourselves to another. When we join Christ to a prostitute, for instance, it's because the understanding is the two become one flesh. And how can that be if one man has many wives? How could that work? And that would not work. And then we come to Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 17, where he's about to die. He's at the end of his life. He's at the end of his ministry to the people, and he is giving them final instructions. And one of those is in the day and when they would have a king. And so he's already, his role as a prophet, he can see what is going to occur. God has allowed him to see what will occur in their future. And in that, he gives the guidelines of the king. And of course, that one would be that in verse 17 of Deuteronomy 17, that the king would not multiply unto himself many wives. And then it even tells the reason, because it would turn his heart away. And we see that dramatically exhibited through Solomon, where he went into idolatry quite enthusiastically, if you will, because of his foreign wives. So here's the deal. When you come to commentaries, of course, many would say, well, that was the Eastern custom of that day. In other words, for monarchs to take many wives was common, and it was allowable to them. And there was a political reason behind it, that it would form alliances with other nations so that they would be more apt to deal peaceably with you as a king because you were married to one of their daughters, if you will. And so that would be the reason for that. But in this case, David is marrying women of course, the nation of Israel, not foreign nations like Solomon did, but he's actually marrying women of Israel itself. And again, commentators would use that other argument, though, about alliances and saying, well, David can do this because he's making alliances with the different tribes, so that when the elders came before him, they would be more apt to deal equitably with him and not give him trouble. And when he does become king, because remember, Samuel had already anointed him king. And we notice at the beginning of this chapter that Samuel has died. He is no longer there, but nonetheless, he has already anointed David to be king. And David knew that he would be king. Jonathan, Saul's son, knew that he was going to be king. Even Saul, in this next chapter, 26, will say that indeed he will prevail. So he knew he was going to be king. And so some would argue that he's making alliances here with the people, the other tribes in the nation, just so that there would be good relations there. But as you look through even some of his future marriages from this one, even, I am strongly convinced that David, like most of us men, like many of us men, I would say, are prone to the lust of our hearts and the lust of our eyes, so that we have to be on guard in regards to our relations with the opposite sex. Even Job said that he had made a covenant with his eyes that he would not look upon another woman with lust. With the understanding of this, that in our fallen nature, that is a natural condition of us in our sinfulness as men, that we would look at others apart from the one whom God has covenanted us with, that woman that we've made covenant with, that you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, more or less, and we are joined together and become one flesh. But men are prone to wander in this, and not just men, women can too, but regardless, it's the sin nature within us. It's not from God. And so even though God permitted David to marry, it was a stumbling stone to him, because not only it's called strife among the children within his family, and it did from different marriages, but I imagine even within the wives themselves there was strife and struggle, and we see examples of that from other patriarchs and such that took more than one wife. So again, God does permit us to fall into sin. And again, we can only submit to the principle of concurrence when these things are happening. And again, you can look that up, but here I'm going to give you a simple explanation, and that is that what you meant for evil, and that's what we do when we sin, we mean it for evil, God means for good. In other words, God is the only being who can use evil to bring about good. We cannot do that consciously of ourselves. We do not have that ability to do that, but God can even use the wicked to bring about his purposes, yet without being tainted by that wickedness. And this is a foundational creedal confession made in the Westminster Confession of Faith of 1647 talks about this in I believe it's chapter 3 of that, and also the Baptist Confession of Faith of 1649 says it almost in the very same words, so that he is not tainted by sin, though he can use these matters in his infinite wisdom, which we do not have, because again, we are in a fallen world, we are fallen creatures, and God is using fallen creatures. Way Martin Luther would describe it in his book, Bondage of the Will. He would say it's like a righteous man riding a lame horse. God is working with his lame horses, which is you and I, and he is having to guide us, and we're always wanting to go into the ditch, if you will. So God permits David to sin in this way, and he permits others to sin in this way, not to condone this behavior, but in order to bring instruction to him and to bring about God's purposes. And it includes his discipline. And so, again, this far exceeds our wisdom to be able to reason out, to say, oh, I'm going to do this wrong in order to bring about this right. We don't have that capacity to do that. We will do a wrong to do a wrong, and that's why we do it. But God will permit us to do a wrong, but he can bring a right out of it, but only he can do that. And that is something that is, I know, hard to grapple with. And it is something that we have to understand and submit, that our God, who is not the author of sin or tainted by it, is able to use it so that he even restricts Satan in what he can and cannot do. And again, those examples are there in the scriptures, and they're very evident. They're not hidden by any means, and they're there for us to see. So David is permitted. Now, in the very same way, in this very same chapter, he is not permitted to sin as well. When it came to Nabal, even David confesses this, that if he were to go and kill Nabal, Abigail's husband, it would have not been a righteous anger. It would have been revenge. And that is not in the realm of men, the revenge. That's sinful. It says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because it's not the same type of vengeance that you and I would enact on another. So in one sense, God prevents, by sending Abigail to David, to prevent him from sinning in that manner, but he does not prevent him sinning in another manner. And again, this is something you and I have to grapple with each on our own. There is a right answer here, and God knows it. Has he given us the conscience to know it ourselves, so that we are fully persuaded in this? So my take on the 300-pound gorilla is, David is sinning, even though it may be culturally acceptable. It is not acceptable in the precepts that God has already set forth, Genesis chapter 2, Deuteronomy chapter 17. So anyway, I'll leave you with this. It's a tough one, but it's the 300-pound gorilla that we all stumble over as we come to this, and sometimes we want to use it as an excuse for us to sin. And in there, we even double the sin when we use God's word to excuse our sin. And we should never, ever do that. We are without excuse. That's what Paul tells us in the book of Romans. We are without excuse in Romans chapter 1. And we are so desperately in need of God's grace and mercy towards us. And that only comes through Jesus Christ and our faith in him. So that is our, did you see that? And I wish I hadn't have seen it, but I did. And, but I tackled it. And you may or may not even agree with my reasonings in this. Again, this is where I say you have to wrestle with your conscience before God and his word before you as I've presented it today, and come to your conclusions as God wills it. And I pray that you do so. I hope to see you again, and thank you for watching.